She crashed through my barn at 2 a.m. drunk, so I called in a Chinook. If you've never seen a $120,000 Mercedes dangling from a military helicopter at sunrise, you're missing out on one hell of a sight. The HOA president thought she owned our neighborhood, thought she could destroy my life with violation notices and lawsuits. But when she took things too far that night, I decided to show her what real power looks like at 1500 FT. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments, because this story of revenge is about to get legendary. The property came with old barns that had been standing since the 1950s, rolling pastures that stretched to the horizon, and most importantly, agricultural zoning that predated any residential development. By decades, I had 6 horses in total, including Mustang, a 15-year-old rescue I'd saved from an auction when he was just skin and bones, ribs showing through his dull coat every morning. Without fail, I'd wake up at 5:30, brew a pot of strong black coffee and head out to feed them, listening to their gentle nickering and the roosters from the farm next door, announcing the new day. Life was simple and peaceful. Exactly what I needed after a decade of deployments to places where peace was just a word in diplomatic speeches. The morning mist would rise from the pastures as the horses grazed, and I'd lean against the fence coffee mug, warming my hands, thinking I'd finally found my slice of heaven on earth. That peace lasted exactly 3 years. Before everything changed, a development company from the city bought up the surrounding farmland, and before I knew it, cookie-cutter houses sprouted up like mushrooms after rain, each one identical to the last, beige and bland. With the houses came the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, and with the HOA came Linda Harrison Blake, though I wouldn't learn her full story until much later. Linda was 48 years old, recently divorced for the second time, according to neighborhood gossip, and had somehow maneuvered herself into the position of HOA president within 6 months of moving into her 4,000 FT McMansion. She wore designer suits to weekend board meeting, drove a pristine white Mercedes that she had detailed twice a week, and carried herself like she was running a Fortune 500 company instead of a suburban neighborhood of 200 homes. The first time I met her, she showed up at my gate unannounced on a Saturday morning. While I was mucking out stalls, she looked at my boots still, caked with mud and worse from the barn work, and wrinkled her nose like she'd smelled something that had been dead for a week in the summer heat. "Mr. Caldwell," she said in a voice that could freeze water in July, "we need to discuss your livestock situation and its impact on our community standard." I tried to be polite, explaining that my ranch predated the HOA by years, that I had all the proper permits and grandfather rights, but she just smiled that cold smile that I'd come to know too well and said we'd see about that. Looking back now, I should have known right then that this woman would become my nemesis, but I was naive enough to think logic and law would prevail. The first violation notice came on a Tuesday morning, bright yellow paper taped to my gate like a scarlet letter. I remember the date because I was teaching a young girl named Emma how to properly mount Mustang when my neighbor, Travis Morrison, walked over from his property, waving the paper and trying not to laugh at the absurdity of it. Travis was my old army buddy who'd served with me in Afghanistan, now flying helicopters for Rocky Mountain Aviation, giving tourist rides over the mountains to folks with deep pockets. He was missing 2 fingers on his left hand from an IED explosion outside Kandahar, and always wore black leather gloves to cover the scarred stumps, more for others' comfort than his own. The notice complained about offensive odors emanating from livestock and excessive noise from animal vocalizations during inappropriate hours. In other words, Linda didn't like that horses smelled like horses and occasionally neighed when they felt like it. I responded politely with a certified letter containing copies of my agricultural permits, the grandfather clause that protected pre-existing farms from new development rules, and a brief explanation of Colorado's right-to-farm laws that had been on the books since the 1990s. I thought that would be the end of it, that she'd realize she had no legal standing and would find someone else to harass. How naive I was about the depths of her determination. The violations started coming daily, after that each one more ridiculous than the last, grass exceeding in height in non-agricultural areas, though my entire property was zoned agricultural fence color, not in compliance with HOA standards, even though the fence had been there since before she was born. Commercial vehicle creating noise disturbance, which was the hay delivery truck that came once a month and had been coming for 20 years. By the end of the first month, I had 47 violation notices stacked on my Kit Jane table like a paper monument to petty tyranny. Each one came with a fine starting at $50 and escalating to $500, adding up to more than most people's monthly mortgage payment. Travis sat at my Kit Jane table one evening, beer in hand, flipping through them with increasing disbelief and dark amusement. Brother, I saw less paperwork in Kandahar, and that was an actual war zone. This woman thinks she's running the Taliban of suburbia, he said, raising his gloved hand in a mock salute. That would have been funny if the situation wasn't so serious. I tried to stay calm, really. I did, telling myself this too would pass like a kidney stone. Painful, but temporary. Every morning, I maintained my routine like a meditation against the chaos Linda was trying to bring into my life. Coffee at 5:30, horses fed by 6 kids, and then I'd check the gate for the inevitable yellow notice that would be waiting like a toxic sunrise. But something was changing inside me that I recognized from my deployment days. My hands had started shaking slightly when I'd see that HOA logo, a pretentious shield with Willowbrook Estates and fake medieval script. I'd lie awake at night, calculating the fines adding up, wondering how long I could keep fighting this war of attrition before my savings ran dry. One evening, I sat in Mustang's stall with my back against the wall, running my hands through his mane, while he munched hay contentedly, and found myself apologizing to him in a voice I barely recognized as my own. "I'm sorry, buddy. I promised you'd never have to leave another home, and I meant it. We'll figure this out somehow." The old horse nuzzled my shoulder with a soft nose, and I felt that familiar tightness in my chest that I hadn't experienced since my last deployment when we'd lost Jenkins to a roadside bomb. Then came the knock on my door that changed everything. From a cold war to a hot one, it was a Thursday evening sun just starting to paint the mountains orange and purple when I heard the doorbell chime. With aggressive insistence, I opened it to find Linda standing there with her trademark smirk and a stack of papers thick enough to stop a bullet. Her perfume overwhelming in the evening air. Behind her stood a man in an expensive suit that probably costs more than I made in a month, briefcase in hand, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "But on my doorstep, Mr. Caldwell," Linda said, her voice dripping with false sweetness like poisoned honey. "This is my attorney, Mr. Richardson. We need to discuss your illegal livestock operation and the immediate steps you'll need to take to come into compliance." Travis, who'd been helping me repair a section of fence that had mysteriously been damaged the night before, appeared at the window behind them like a guardian angel with a twisted sense of humor. He took one look at the scene, assessed the threat level with military precision, and whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "Shit just got real. Brother, want me to start recording?" I gave him the slightest nod as I stepped aside to let them in, knowing that Colorado was a one-party consent state for recordings, and that Travis never missed an opportunity to document Linda's escalating, crazy Richardson. The lawyer was all business as he laid out their case on my Kit Jane table, spreading documents like he was planning an invasion, which, I suppose he was Linda, sat across from me, her manicured nails tapping rhythmically on the wood, in a pattern that made me want to snap them off one by one, the bottom line. Mr. Caldwell Richardson said, adjusting his wire rim glasses that probably cost more than my monthly feed bill, is that the HOA has determined your livestock operation is in violation of multiple covenants, regardless of when your property was established. You have 30 days to remove all animals from the property or face legal action that will result in liens, fines, and eventual foreclosure. I felt my jaw clench hard enough to crack teeth, but kept my voice steady, drawing on the same reserves that had kept me calm under actual fire. And what covenants would those be, considering my property predates your HOA by decades? I have grandfather rights that are clearly established in Colorado law. Linda leaned forward, her perfume forming an almost visible cloud of aggression, and I noticed her pupils were dilated. Despite the bright kit chain lights, rights can be challenged, Mr. Caldwell, especially when you're disturbing the peace and property values of an entire community every day. Your horses remain is another day our property values drop. Travis had been recording the whole conversation on his phone from the doorway, and now he stepped into view with that dangerous grin he got right before doing something spectacularly stupid in Afghanistan. "Hey there, Linda! Smile for the camera. You're about to be famous in all the wrong ways." Karen gone wild, am I right? Linda's face flushed red from her Botox, frozen forehead, to her spray, tanned neck, her composure cracking like cheap paint in the deck. "You can't record me without my permission. That's illegal, I'll sue you too." Travis laughed, the sound sharp as broken glass in the tents. "Kit Jane, actually I can record whatever I want on Bobby's property with his permission. Colorado's a one-party consent state, and Bobby here consented when he let me in. Funny how you don't know the law for someone who loves quoting it like scripture." The lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his chair, leaning over to whisper something in Linda's ear that made her face go even redder, if that was possible. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard, gathering her papers with shaking hands. "This isn't over, not by a long shot. I'll make your life a living hell until you comply with our community standards." Travis stepped closer, still smiling, but his eyes had gone cold as a January morning in the mountains. "Lady, I spent 2 tours in Helmand Province, getting shot at by actual bad guys with actual guns. Your version of hell probably comes with Wi-Fi and lattes and a homeowners association that validates your parking. You want to threaten someone, maybe pick someone who hasn't been threatened by people who actually meant it." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. The kind of pre-violence energy I remembered from checkpoint duty. Linda gathered her papers, her hands shaking with rage rather than fear, that entitled fury of someone not used to being challenged. "We'll see about that," she hissed, before storming out, her heels clicking on my floor like an angry typewriter, her lawyer trailing behind, looking relieved to escape the kit. Jane that had become a battlefield after they left. I spent hours researching HOA laws online, my old laptop heating up my thighs as I dove deep into legal forums and precedent cases. What I found was interesting and infuriating in equal measure. It turned out Linda had won her position by a margin of 3 votes in an election where only 20% of residents had bothered to participate, most assuming the HOA would remain the harmless organization it had been before her arrival. More interesting was that several board positions were filled by her friends who'd moved in around the same time she did, a coordinated takeover that would have impressed me if it wasn't aimed at destroying my life. I started composing my own letters, documenting 23 violations. Linda herself had committed according to the very rules she loved to weaponize. She mowed her lawn at 6 in the morning on Saturdays, violating the noise ordinance she'd cited against my hay delivery. Her precious little Pomeranian regularly defecated in neighbors' yards while she pretended not to notice a health code violation that carried hefty fines. She routinely parked her Mercedes blocking the sidewalk during her wine-tasting parties that went until 2 in the morning, forcing mothers with strollers to walk in the street. The emergency HOA meeting was called for the following week, and something told me this was Linda's attempt at a final solution to her Bobby problem. The community center was packed beyond capacity. That night, standing room only, with residents I'd never seen before, crowding in like they were attending a prize fight, which I suppose they were. Linda stood at the podium in a power suit that screamed, "I'm in charge," while her voice painted a picture of disease, depreciated property values, and children at risk from dangerous animals that belonged in a Stephen King novel. "Ease horses," she said, with theatrical disgust, "carry diseases that can spread to our children." The smell alone has made it impossible for several residents to enjoy their own backyards. Property values have already dropped 3% since Mr. Caldwell refused to comply with reasonable requests to relocate his livestock. She was good at it. Had to give her that mixing just enough truth with her lies to make them believable to people who didn't know better when she finished her presentation, complete with a PowerPoint that must have taken hours to create. An older gentleman in the back stood up slowly, deliberately, like he was unveiling a monument. He was well-dressed, but understated, carrying an old leather briefcase that had seen better decades, and something about him made Linda's smile falter for just a second. "That motion is out of order," he said, in a voice that carried natural authority despite its soft volume. "You failed to provide the required 30-day notice for covenant amendments as specified in Section 12. 4 of our bylaws. Furthermore, I have here a petition signed by 40% of residents opposing any action against Mr. Caldwell's ranch, which under our current rules triggers an automatic stay of proceedings." Linda's smile became brittle as old paint, but she maintained her composure with visible effort. "Thank you for your input, but as president, I determine what's in the best interest of this community, and clearly livestock operations are not compatible with a modern residential neighborhood." The old man smiled sadly, like he was looking at a disappointing student who'd failed to learn an important lesson. "Willowbrook isn't your personal kingdom. Linda, you do well to remember that some of us were here when this was all farmland, and we remember what community actually means." He sat down, and I noticed him slide a business card across the table to another resident with practiced subtlety. The meeting ended in chaos that would have been funny if my livelihood wasn't at stake, with shouting matches breaking out between Linda's supporters and my neighbor turning against neighbor like some suburban civil war through it all. Linda maintained that cold smile that never reached her eyes, but I could see the calculation behind them wheels turning as she planned her next move, as people filed out into the parking lot where arguments continued under the streetlights. Travis appeared at my elbow like a khaki-clad ghost that was round one buddy. "She took some hits, but she's not backing down. Did you see her hands shaking when the old guy stood up? She knows him, and whatever their history is, it's not good." I nodded, watching Linda get into her Mercedes, already on her phone, probably calling her lawyer, or maybe her flying monkeys, to plan the next attack. "Neither am I backing down," I said quietly, feeling that familiar pre-M mission. Calm settling over me. This is my home, those are my horses, and I'll be damned if some suburban dictator is going to drive me out. But Linda wasn't. Done with conventional warfare, and what happened next made everything. Before looked like a polite disagreement between neighbors. The next morning, I woke to frantic banging on my door that sent my heart racing from 0 to 60 in about 2 seconds. It was 5 a day. Still dark outside with just a hint of dawn touching the eastern mountains. Travis's voice came through the door, panicked in a way I'd never heard before, not even when we were taking actual fire. Bobby, get out here right now, your horses. I threw on jeans and boots, not bothering with a shirt, and ran outside into the cool morning air. The barn door was wide open, swinging in the morning breeze like a broken jaw, and I could see even from the house that something was terribly wrong. 2 horses were missing from the pasture, Buttercup and Sterling, both young mares I'd been training for a local therapeutic riding program. Fresh tire tracks led from the broken fence through the mud, deep ruts that told a story of a heavy vehicle. And a hasty departure, and they're nailed to the splintered wood with a vindictiveness that made my blood boil, was another HOA violation notice. This one was different, though, handwritten in Linda's distinctive script that looked like she was trying to stab the paper with her pen. Improper animal containment resulting in escaped livestock, $500 fine. Such a shame when animals wander off in the night, isn't it? Perhaps you should consider whether you're capable of properly caring for them. I stood there in the pre-dawn darkness, rage building in my chest, like a reactor approaching critical mass, and I knew with absolute certainty that this had just become war. I called the police immediately while Travis started saddling his own horse to help search my hands, steady, despite the fury burning in my chest. Deputy Maria Rodriguez arrived within 15 minutes, chewing gum rapidly as she surveyed the scene with professional eyes that missed nothing. Rodriguez was 35, tough as nails with arms that showed she didn't skip gym day, and a phoenix tattoo barely visible under her watchband that hinted at her own story of rising from ashes. She took photos of the tire tracks with methodical precision, measured the boot prints in the mud, and bagged the handwritten note with more care than it deserved. "Off the record," she said, glancing around to make sure we were alone. Traffic cams caught a white Mercedes in this area around 2 kGA. Driving erratically, license plate matches someone we both know all too well. She adjusted her watch, revealing. More of the Phoenix's wing. This woman has called in complaints about my patrol car. 17 times since I started this beat. 17 says I park illegally when I'm responding to actual emergencies. Claims my sirens disturb her beauty sleep, even complained that my uniform isn't pressed properly. She popped her gum with a sharp crack that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet morning. But proving she took your horses, that's another matter. Entirely. She's too smart to have done it herself. Probably hired. Someone paid cash, no trail. But Linda had made a crucial mistake in her escalation. One that would come back to haunt her. She'd assumed I'd react emotionally. Maybe do something stupid that would give her more ammunition, but she didn't know that. In the army, we were taught that the best revenge is served with precision planning and perfect timing. We found Buttercup and Sterling 2 miles away in an abandoned lot that had been foreclosed on years ago, penned in with temporary fencing that looked hastily erected. They were scared but unharmed, whinnying frantically when they saw me approaching with a bucket of grain. Their eyes wild with fear as I loaded them into Travis's trailer. My relief at finding them safe was mixed with a cold fury that reminded me of the focused anger that had kept me alive in combat zones. Someone had terrorized innocent animals to get to me, and that crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Back at the ranch, I spent hours repairing the fence while Travis flew his drone overhead, documenting everything with the thoroughness of someone gathering evidence for a war crimes tribunal. "Check this out," he said, showing me the footage on his tablet with barely contained excitement. "See those tire tracks? They match the wheelbase of an S-Class Mercedes perfectly." I measured them against the specs online, and look here, there's a partial shoe print by the gate. That's definitely a women's size 7 or 8 he'd boot, probably designer. From the tread pattern, she might as well have left a signed confession. But I knew that wouldn't be enough for legal action, not with her lawyers and money protecting her like armor. So I decided to fight differently, using her own weapons against her. With interest. If Linda wanted to play the violation game, I show her how it was done by someone who'd actually read the entire HOA rulebook, all 347 pages of mind-numbing bureaucracy. The campaign I launched was something Travis dubbed Death by 1,000 paper cuts, and it was beautiful in its simplicity. I sent 10 to 15 violation notices daily, all technically valid under the HOA rules that Linda loved to quote. Her mailbox was 1 an A4 in 2 tall, according to Regulation 6. 5.2. Her garbage cans were visible from the street for 37 minutes before pickup, violating the unsightly objects clause she'd used against my hay bales. The bird feeder in her backyard was attracting crows, which were classified as pest animals under the same rules she'd used to classify my horses as nuisances. Travis contributed with drone footage that was technically taken from public airspace, showing Linda rolling through stop signs at 2 mph each, letting her dog off leash for exactly 4 seconds, while she checked her phone, and leaving her Mercedes idling in the driveway for a winter warm-up in violation of the environmental protection clauses. Within a week, Linda was receiving more violations than she was sending her mailbox stuffed with. Yellow notices like some kind of karmic justice. Travis posted compilation videos online with carefully blurred addresses, but making it clear this was Willowbrook Estates, and the videos went viral faster than a California wildfire. 2 million views. In 3 days, picked up by local news, shared by people who'd had their own HOA nightmare. The comment sections were gold, full of similar stories and suggestions for further action that ranged from legal to criminally creative. But Linda's response was swift and vicious as a cornered rattlesnake. Mrs. Jane had been one of my first supporters, a tiny 73-year-old grandmother who barely reached my shoulder but had a spine of steel. She'd lived in Willowbrook since before it had a name back when. It was just farmland and dreams. Every Sunday, she'd bring homemade dumplings to the fence for me and carrots for the horses, always saying, "Good neighbors look after each other." In her accented English, she'd stood up at that first meeting, voice shaking but determined, and told Linda that horses belonged here more than any HOA rules. She began calling residents who'd signed the petition, supporting me, threatening them with fines and legal action. Her voice slurred in some calls, suggesting she was self-medicating with her favorite Pinot Grigio. Then she went too far, crossing another line that would prove to be her undoing. Mrs. Jane, a 73-year-old grandmother who'd spoken in my defense at the meeting, received a call from Linda that left her in tears. Linda had screamed at her, calling her a senile old bat who should be in a home instead of interfering in HOA business, and threatening to make her life so miserable. She'd begged to move Mrs. Jane's daughter live-streamed from the hospital as her mother was admitted for stress chest pains. The elderly woman hooked up to monitors because a suburban tyrant couldn't handle opposition. The community was in uproar, and something fundamental shifted in the dynamic. This wasn't just about me and my horses anymore. This was about a bully terrorizing an entire neighborhood, and people were done being afraid, looking at that sweet elderly woman in a hospital bed. Because of Linda's harassment, something hardened in me like steel being tempered enough. "Playing nice," I said to Travis, who nodded grimly beside me. "Time to find out who Linda Harrison Blake really is." Travis's response was immediate and military. copy that I'll reach out to some friends who are good at finding things that people want to stay hidden. And Bobby, when we find it, and we will find it, we end this properly. No half measures that night. Rodriguez showed up at my door, off duty, wearing civilian clothes that made her look younger, almost vulnerable. A folder tucked under her arm that she held like it contained nuclear codes. "I can't do this officially," she said, glancing around nervously like Linda might materialize from the shadows. "But someone needs to see this before things get worse." She handed me a USB drive that felt heavier than its few grams, should have security footage from the past 6 months, plus some interesting reading about our HOA president, let's just say Linda. Harrison Blake isn't the first name she's used, and Willowbrook isn't the first neighborhood she's terrorized. I spent hours going through the files on my laptop, each video more damning than the last. There was Linda meeting with construction, company representatives in parking lots after dark, exchanging envelopes that definitely didn't contain birthday cards there. She was stumbling out of HOA meetings, wine bottle visible in her oversized purse keys, jingling in her unsteady hand. The security footage showed a pattern of escalating drinking erratic behavior and what looked suspiciously like her keying a car that belonged to someone who had opposed her in a meeting. But the real bombshell was in a separate file labeled simply, "Background Linda Kowalski wanted for real estate fraud in Nevada." With an active warrant from 2018, the photo was definitely her just younger, with blonde hair instead of her current brunette, and a hardness in her eyes that the years had only intensified. The police report detailed a scheme where she'd posed as a real estate agent, taken deposits from multiple families for the same properties, then vanished with over $200,000. She'd been caught, but jumped bail and apparently had been living as Linda. Harrison Blake ever since, probably using her ill-gotten gains to buy her way into our neighborhood. The final video was de-stamped just 3 days ago, showing Linda at an upscale restaurant downtown with a developer I recognized from the local news. The audio was crystal clear, thanks to them sitting near the restaurant's outdoor speakers that Rodriguez had thoughtfully included in the recording angle. "Make sure Caldwell's property value tanks," Linda said, sliding a thick envelope across the table. "I want him desperate to sell within 6 months. Once he's gone, the others will follow, and you can develop that whole section. We're talking about 20 acres of prime real estate. Once we force out the remaining holdouts." The developer looked uncomfortable, but took the money, and I realized this was never about horses or property values. This was about good old-fashioned greed, with Linda getting kickbacks for driving out long-time residents so developers could swoop in. Travis watched the videos with me, his expression growing darker with each revelation. "Brother, this is worse than that captain at Bram who was selling supplies to the locals. At least he was honest about being corrupt." I was about to respond when headlights suddenly flooded my living room like stage lights at a concert. The roar of a V8 engine shattered the quiet night, growing louder by the second. Before I could react, before I could even stand up from my chair, my front window exploded in a shower of glass that caught the light like deadly diamonds. Linda's white Mercedes crashed through the hood, crumpling against my coffee table with a sound like the world's worst symphony. She stumbled out of the driver's seat, designer dress torn at the shoulder, mascara streaming down her face in black rivers, an empty wine bottle still clutched in her manicured hand like a trophy. "You ruined everything!" she screamed, swaying on her feet like a tree in a hurricane. "I was supposed to win. I always win. I am the president of this neighborhood." The scene was surreal beyond description, like something from a fever dream. My living room was destroyed, drywall dust settling like snow. Linda standing among the wreckage, like some demented queen surveying her kingdom, her car's engine was still running, steam hissing from the crumpled radiator, one headlight pointing at the ceiling like a spotlight on insanity. I grabbed my phone with hands that were surprisingly steady, immediately calling 911 while keeping my distance from her. She was clearly drunk beyond reason, possibly dangerous, and definitely unhinged in a way that made all her previous behavior look sane by comparison. You think you're so smart with your stupid horses and your stupid farm and your stupid grandfather rights, she slurred, throwing the empty bottle at my bookshelf where it shattered against my deployment photos. I know people, important people, county commissioners, judges, developers, with more money than you'll see in 10 lifetimes. I'll bury you in lawsuits until you're living in that barn with your precious horses eating hay because you can't afford food. Travis burst through my back door, having heard the crash from his house next door, where he'd been reviewing more drone footage. He took one look at the scene, assessed the situation with combat-trained eyes, and immediately pulled out his phone to start live streaming. Holy ladies and gentlemen, the HOA president just drove her Mercedes through Bobby's house. This is not a drill, people. She literally just crashed through his living room wall. You can't make this stuff up. Rodriguez arrived in record time, still in her pajamas, but with her badge and service weapon, looking like she'd been expecting this call for months. She took one look at Linda, then at the breathalyzer reading that was so high it was almost impressive, and shook her head with disgust. Linda Blake, or should I say Linda Kowalski, you're under arrest for DUI, reckless endangerment, destruction of property, and that outstanding warrant from Nevada that you thought we didn't know about. Linda's face went white under the smeared makeup, her bravado evaporating like morning mist. How do you know? You can't know that Tom promised he'd keep it secret. He promised. She lunged at me, but Rodriguez quickly restrained her with practiced ease. Tom who? Rodriguez asked as she cuffed Linda, but the drunk woman had clamped her mouth shut, realizing she'd said too much as they led her away. Linda kept screaming about lawsuits and revenge, her perfect composure finally completely shattered like my front window. The damage to my house was extensive, with the Mercedes front end in my living room like some kind of bizarre modern art installation. But the damage to my horses was what truly broke my heart. The crash had partially collapsed the attached barn, and Mustang, my faithful old rescue, had been struck by falling debris. Dr. Foster, the veterinarian, worked through the night to save him, her face grim. As she examined the damage, 50 chance, she said quietly, her hands gentle on his flank, and if he makes it, he'll have a permanent limp. I'm sorry, Bobby. I know how much he means to you. I sat with Mustang through the night, his labored breathing the only sound in the damaged barn, my hand on his neck, feeling each struggled breath for the first time since my friend Jenkins died in an IED explosion in Afghanistan. I cried, not just a few tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place I'd locked away for years. This horse had survived so much, had trusted me to keep him safe. And now, because of one woman's power trip and greed, he might die in a collapsed barn. The tears weren't just for Mustang, but for Mrs. Jane in the hospital, for all the neighbors living in fear, for a community torn apart by one person's toxic ambition. By morning, Linda had been released on bail, her high-powered attorney having worked magic with a judge who was probably in her pocket. She immediately went on the offensive, claiming I had entrapped her, that the barn was built illegally close to the road, that she'd swerve to avoid hitting a dog that mysteriously no one else had seen. Her PR team was working overtime to spin the story, but the live Stream video had already gone viral with a vengeance. Millions had watched her drunkenly crash into my house while screaming about being president, and the internet had done what it does best, turning her into a meme that spread faster than gossip at a church picnic. But Linda wasn't done fighting dirty. She sent a message through her lawyer that made my blood run cold. Drop all claims, stop the social media posts and leave voluntarily within 30 days, or she'd sue every single resident who'd supported me, bankrupting them with legal fees that would destroy their lives. The threat wasn't idle. I knew she had the money and connections to do it, and the thought of my neighbors suffering because of me was almost unbearable. I stood in my ruined living room as the morning sun streamed through the Mercedes-shaped hole in my wall, looking at the devastation one woman's ambition had wrought. My home was damaged. My horse was fighting for his life. Elderly neighbors were in the hospital, and a community was living in fear. This had started as a simple dispute over some horses, but it had become something much larger, a fight for the soul of a neighborhood, for the right of ordinary people to live without fear of a petty tyrant. Travis found me there, staring at the destruction with hollow eyes. For once, his usual dark humor was absent, replaced by the serious soldier I'd served with, in places where right and wrong were decided with bullets. What's the play, brother? She's not going to stop until she destroys everyone who opposed her. I turned to him, my decision crystallizing like ice in my chest. Remember Operation Shock and Awe, the mission in Kandahar where we had to make such a statement that the enemy would never even think about attacking that position again. Travis's eyes widened as understanding dawned. You're not thinking what I think you're thinking I am? Call your buddy at Rocky Mountain Aviation, the one with the heavy lift certification. Tell him it's for a Mustang and tell him to bring the biggest bird he's got. Travis grinned for the first time since the crash. That dangerous smile I remembered from our deployment days when we were about to do something spectacularly audacious, Roger. What about the legal side? Pretty sure there's no regulation covering what you're planning. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through contacts until I found the number I needed. Leave that to me. There's a law about removing vehicles from private property after an accident. It doesn't specify exactly how they have to be removed, and I'm betting no one ever thought to explicitly prohibit helicopter extraction. That night, I made the necessary preparations with the focused intensity of planning a military operation. The lawyer, I consulted a young guy named Peterson who specialized in creative interpretations of property law, couldn't stop laughing when I explained my plan. Technically, he said, wiping tears of mirth from his eyes, state law, section 247.3, does say you can remove a vehicle that's crashed on your property by any means necessary to prevent further damage or danger. I've never seen anyone interpret it quite this literally. But yes, it would be legal, unconventional as hell, but legal. The cost would be astronomical, 15,000 for the Chinook rental crew, fuel, and permits. Travis's friend at Rocky Mountain Aviation was calling it a film shoot to make the paperwork easier, with a wink and a nod that said he knew exactly what we were really doing. Travis worked his magic. Over 3 days of intense negotiations, Pete, his pilot buddy, had initially laughed at the request until Travis mentioned it was for Mustang. Turns out Pete's daughter had cerebral palsy and had done therapy riding on Mustang 2 summers ago. That horse gave my girl confidence to walk. Pete said over the phone, "Tell me when and where." The rigging crew volunteered their time after hearing the story, and suddenly we had an operation coming together with military precision. "Worth every penny," I said, thinking of Mustang struggling. to breathe of Mrs. Jane's tears of every person Linda had terrorized in her quest for suburban domination. Some statements are worth making, no matter the cost. The plan was elegantly simple in concept, breathtakingly audacious in execution at sunrise, when the light would be perfect for every camera phone in the neighborhood. When most residents would be awake to witness it, we would airlift Linda's Mercedes from my property and deliver it somewhere appropriately. Public Travis spread the word. Carefully through social media, cryptic posts about something big happening at sunrise with helicopter emojis and popcorn emojis that had people speculating wildly by 4 a.m. were already gathering on the street with coffee and cameras. Like spectators at the world's strangest tailgate party, Linda, sleeping off her bail hearing and probably self-medicating with her wine collection, had no idea what was coming. As I made final preparations, my phone rang with an unknown number. Mr. Caldwell, this is Channel 9 News. We received a tip about something major happening at your property tomorrow morning. Care to comment? I couldn't help but grin, feeling that pre-mission adrenaline starting to flow. You might want to have your helicopter ready. This is going to be one for the history books. Outside in Linda's driveway, her Mercedes sat innocently under a custom car cover, unaware that in just a few hours it would become the most famous car in America. 4:30 a.m. came quickly, the darkest hour before dawn when the world holds its breath. Travis and 5 other veterans from our old unit gathered in my damaged kit chain, sharing coffee and war stories around the Mercedes-happed hole in the wall. The mood was electric, like before a mission that everyone knew would be talked about for years. "All right, boys," Travis announced, pulling on his signature black gloves with theatrical flair. "Remember the Baghdad airlift in 2010 when we had to extract that diplomat's armored car from the green zone? This time, we're lifting Karen's Mercedes, and it's going to be even better." He raised his gloved hand in a salute that we all returned. For Mustang for Mrs. Jane, for everyone who's ever been bullied by a power-hungry HOA president. The others echoed the toast with their coffee mugs. These were good men who'd heard about what happened and volunteered their time without hesitation. Martinez ran a rigging company and had brought professional-grade lifting equipment. Johnson worked in aviation logistics and had handled all the paperwork to make this legitimate. Thompson had connections with the film industry that made our movie shoot permits bulletproof, complete with fake script pages about an action movie featuring a helicopter. Chase the Chinook arrived exactly at 5:30, just as the eastern sky began to show the first blush of dawn. The massive twin-rotor helicopter approached low and slow from the north, the thunderous beat of its blades setting off every car alarm in a 3-ruck radius. Windows rattled in their frames. Dogs barked. In harmony with the chaos, and dozens of residents stumbled out in their robes and slippers, phones already recording what they knew would be legendary. The CH-47 was a magnificent beast of a machine, military green against the pink and orange dawn. Sky, its presence commanding attention like nothing else. Could Travis's friend Pete was at the controls, a fellow veteran who'd transitioned to civilian heavy lift operations and still flew with military precision Rocky Mountain aviation reporting. "For duty," he announced over the radio with barely contained glee, "a Mercedes removal is ordered. Let's make this sunrise one to remember." Within minutes, they had heavy-duty lifting straps secured around Linda's Mercedes. The car had been sitting in her driveway since the bail hearing, a monument to her arrogance as the Chinook moved into position, hovering directly overhead. The downwash flattened gardens and sent lawn furniture tumbling. Then slowly, majestically, the white Mercedes began to rise into the dawn sky. 20 FT-50 NFT spinning gently on its cables like the world's most expensive ornament. Holy Mother of God! Someone shouted, "Are you getting this?" A teenager yelled to his friend. Mrs. Patterson from 2 blocks over was openly weeping with joy. About damn time someone stood up to that witch. Even Linda's usual supporters looked stunned. Their phones, recording what they'd never imagined possible. A little girl tugged on her mother's robe. "Mommy, why's the car flying?" Her mother just laughed, because sometimes justice needs wings. Sweetie, that's when Linda appeared, bursting out of her house in Lola lingerie, no shoes, hair a mess, mascara still smeared from the night before the sight of her 120. Zriuzu. Mercedes hovering in the air broke something in her mind. "My car!" she screamed over the rotor noise. "Bring it back! This is terrorism!" Rodriguez appeared beside her, right on cue, in full uniform, calmly chewing gum. "Mum, I'm observing illegal removal of a vehicle from private property following an accident state law, section 247.3, very legal, very cool." The crowd was now in the hundreds, everyone filming this unprecedented event. The schnook performed a slow victory lap around Willowbrook. Estates with the Mercedes spinning below 3 times around the neighborhood, the sunrise light making the whole spectacle surreal. News helicopters circled at a distance, capturing every moment. The final destination was the HOA Community Center, parking lot where the Mercedes was lowered perfectly across 4 parking spaces as it touched down. A massive banner unfurled. "This Mercedes crashed into my barn, driven by HOA president, while drunk justice delivered by Chinook." The emergency HOA meeting that afternoon was standing room only. Linda entered, flanked by lawyers pulling a wheeled suitcase. She'd cleaned herself up, but her eyes had a manic gleam. "Every person who votes to remove me will be sued personally," and she announced, opening the suitcase to reveal stacks of legal documents. "I have all your information. The legal fees alone will bankrupt you." She held up a folder. "Starting with you, Thomas Bradshaw. Should I tell everyone about your wife's death? The insurance money, your secrets?" The room went silent. Thomas stood. "Slowly, you want to air dirty laundry? Fine." He walked to the front with his laptop. "Yes, I co-founded this HOA with my late wife, Margaret. She died of cancer 5 years ago. I used the insurance money to build this community center because it was her dream." His voice cracked, but he continued. "Linda showed up at Margaret's funeral, offered comfort, worked her way into my life like a fool. I fell for it, even helped her get elected. I learned too late she was just playing another character." He connected his laptop to the projector. 247 cents. EO0, that's how much has disappeared from HOA funds over 3 years. He clicked through evidence, fake companies, personal shopping on HOA cards, luxury, vacation. But that's not all. A police report filled the screen. Meet Linda Kowalski, wanted in Nevada. For real estate fraud since 2018, Rodriguez and FBI agents entered Miss Kowalski. "You're under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, identity theft, and that outstanding warrant." As they cuffed her, Linda lost it completely. "Tom, you promised to protect me. This is Cowell's fault." Thomas's response was ice cold. "You're nothing but a con artist who preys on lonely people." They led her away screaming in the aftermath. "The community rallied a fundraiser for my barn, raised $30. What 0 in 2 days? Mrs. Jane recovered from the hospital, brought $5,000 for Mustang's medical bill. The board was dissolved and restructured. When they tried to nominate me as president, I declined. I just want to live in peace with my horses, Travis. Accepted instead his first executive order. Simple one rule: don't be a dick. Meeting adjourned. 6 months later, life had found a new rhythm. My barn was rebuilt with a plaque reading, "Rebuilt by the Willowbrook community. Mustangs survived with a permanent limp but could still carry children. Linda got 5 years in federal prison. Word was she spent her time writing suggestions for better library organization. Travis's helicopter business was booming, with a special sunrise tour that definitely didn't recreate certain vehicle relocation. Thomas and I became friends over coffee and war stories. Rodriguez got promoted to sergeant after handling the Chinook incident. The HOA became what it should have been. Neighbors helping neighbor. Last week, young couple bought Linda's foreclosed house. The pregnant woman asked if their daughter could learn to ride when she was old enough. We'd be honored, I said, watching Mustang investigate her pockets for treats as they left Travis's helicopter passed overhead. And I waved back, looking back, would I do it again? Absolutely. The Chinook cost $15,000. Linda's face when her Mercedes took flight, priceless. But a community finding its voice and choosing kindness over control, that's the real victory to anyone facing their own HOA tyrant. Document everything. Know your rights, build alliances, and if all else fails, I know a guy with a helicopter. Rocky Mountain Aviation. Ask for Travis. Tell him Bobby sent you. Just don't mention it's for relocating cars officially. They only do scenic tours, but sometimes justice needs altitude to make